All right, continuing on with my Why Bitcoin series. This video, Ben, we're going to kind of cover the Satoshi valuation and why that is very important. And it's something different, but it's vital that we as investors and people that use money to start valuing everything we own in Satoshi. So let's just jump right in. This is a post from Michael Saylor that he posted some time ago. That's really pretty cool. Bitcoin as a store of value, the Satoshis are within a Bitcoin. It's when Bitcoin is broken down, is it, I should know this, 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin? Does that sound right?
We should know that.
Why don't you look that up while I'm
I
talking?
am looking it up right now.
I'm pretty sure it's 100 million. But so this is a Bitcoin as a store of value. You can see that basically started just before 100 million. Thank you.
100 million Satoshis per one Bitcoin.
Per one Bitcoin. So basically from 2016, what this chart's showing you is from 2016 through this year, if all these assets here listed here started equal at 100%, we now 8 years later, these are the values compared to Bitcoin. So let's take the US dollar. The US dollar is now worth 1% of Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is the standard, that's how much value the dollar has lost in 8 years. Between Bitcoin going up and the dollar debasing itself, it's lost 99% of its purchasing value, basically. And so it gives you these list of other assets, but that's how staggering the difference is between the value of Bitcoin and what it's doing. It's Satoshi value versus regular assets or currencies. Let's move on. I'm going to show you another video here.
Before we move on, that's the important thing that you pointed out to me a while back was people say, well, Bitcoin can't be a store of value because it used to be 70,000, but then it dropped to 40,000, but then it was at 50 and then it was at 30, and they're comparing it to the US dollar. But if you base the US dollar to the Bitcoin value or the Satoshi value, then it's like, oh, well, actually that makes sense because now it's like the dollar's worth 80 cents, the dollar's worth 70 cents, the dollar's worth 90 cents. That, it keeps getting lower and lower instead of the other way around. So if you look at what it is now compared to what they were together 10 years ago, it is the best store of value.
Yep. And we're going to use real estate as kind of a example here. So let's jump in here. This will help explain it even a little bit better.
Okay. Because it's $1 million at 7%. Okay. Now, here's the thing that's really going to blow your mind. You ready? That house back in 2020, in January of 2020, was 70.2 Bitcoin. Okay. You know what it is with the $1 million in fiat terms, what that house is in Bitcoin today? It's 22 Bitcoin. Okay.
Wow.
So that's a 68% reduction in the price of this house for a person that uses Bitcoin as their unit of account. 68, the house price went down by 68% in the Bitcoiners world. But in the fiat person's world, the price went up by 100%. It's twice as much, right? This is why people can't understand this, because a person who's looking at this, that just looks at Bitcoin as being some made up Mario coin internet money, is looking at this and saying, oh, if I would have just been able to buy a house back in 2020, I'd have $500,000 if I levered it if I levered up, I would have $500,000 in my bank account, right? That's what the no coiner is telling themselves. They're being rope-a-doped into this old legacy system by the numbers and what they think is increase in buying power. But for the Bitcoiner, they're looking at this and they're saying, I do not want to move from the house that I'm in right now. I don't want to buy the bigger house. I don't want to buy, because the value of this thing is going to get cheaper by 68% every 4 years.
Wow.
It's mind blowing. And I think
so we're going to keep this go. Yeah, we're going to keep this going, but it's just, he's basically telling you in real estate what we just showed you on the chart. A little bit of the backstory, as he was saying, in my neighborhood, the average working class home is 500,000 in 2020. It's now $1 million in 2024. So it's gone up by $500,000. It's doubled in price. It was at 72 Bitcoins. Now it's at 22. So in fiat currency, it's doubled in price, but in Bitcoin Satoshi value, it's reduced in price by 60. It's become 68% cheaper to the buyer that's using Bitcoin versus the other buyer that's using regular dollars.
To this as their unit of account and holding period. Let me tell you, like, your life just starts changing in dramatic ways. Because I'm the person who's looking at that house and saying, I'm up 100%. I'm looking at it and saying that house just got cheaper by 68%.
It reminds me of the Ross Stevens annual shareholder letter, where he talks about, it's impossible to overstate the advantage of being on the Bitcoin standard. And he talks about his firm, and he says our firm compensation, rent, and total expenses are up 89%, 119%, and 69% in fiat, and down 36%, 26%, and 43% in Bitcoin. And so it works for everyone. It works for individuals. It works for corporations. Life is getting cheaper for Bitcoiners over time. And it's people who hold fiat, everything is getting more and more expensive. And that, I think,
again, there's a business version. Cost of business is going up for everybody, just like everything else. Not for Bitcoiners, it's not. For Michael Saylor, it's not, who has moved his value of his business, MicroStrategies, into Bitcoin. All right, here's one more clip. Stay with me. This one is it's short, but it gets a little wordy. But he'll bring it together.
They're pricing from a globally manipulated ledger, but Bitcoin doesn't care. It's repricing everything. And the other side of that argument, or the other side of that thing that people miss on Bitcoin, is the relative purchasing power of Bitcoin today. So if you just took 900 divided by 21 million or 20 million or whatever lost coins you think would be, it equates to a terminal value today of about 42 million per Bitcoin. Right? And that, if it stays decentralized and secure, is for sure what it's worth today in relative to purchasing power, kind of played out into the future. But it'll be way higher than that because prices fall to the marginal cost of production. So it's not just higher because measured in a global ledger of 2 quadrillion, that'll be 84 million per Bitcoin, right? And people think it's going up because they're not measuring the ledger, the other ledger. People should measure things in price of Bitcoin, and they'll see it's just the free market, and it's imposing a discipline. And if you really care about your piece of paper, if you care about government getting bigger, government can't get bigger relative to that. So they can by creating more pieces of paper, but this is going to impose it on all governments as well. And eventually, and the governments that are understanding this will be in service of their citizens rather than preying on them. And so it's bound to break a whole lot of beliefs along the way, and a whole bunch of but that's the.
I'm not going to do a good job at this. I'm going to be very super brief and try to just hit the points on this. He's saying because we as citizens, as individuals, have been buying Bitcoin since the beginning, hold majority of the Bitcoin. The government and everybody who doesn't own Bitcoin is going to be beholden to us. That's how important Bitcoins and Satoshis are. it is becoming the premier asset that everything else is going to be weighed against. And that is what he was talking about in the beginning. He was talking about how there's basically $900 trillion in assets in the world. 900 trillion. If you extrapolate Bitcoin out based on those numbers, and I don't know how they go about doing this. I've seen a bunch of different individuals doing this, but they do it basically how they figure out gold is worth 15 trillion. They use the same calculation. If you use that calculation with Bitcoin based on that 900 trillion and the debasing of currency, he said that Bitcoin is not worth $42 million a coin. It's worth 82 or 84 million a coin plus. I don't want to talk about it. We're going to end it right there. This is the magnitude of what we're talking about with valuing your assets in the Satoshi Bitcoin value.
So say that one more time. Exactly how much do they think a Bitcoin is worth?
If you value it like they value gold, they're saying it's going to be worth $42 to $84 million per Bitcoin, based on how they value the world's assets currently. And he's accounting for the debasing of currency. So that graph I showed you in the beginning, all of that factors in. I don't know how they do that, but this is something that's being talked out more and more because they're trying to get across to people that you value things in dollars or whatever your currency is for your country. It's just what we know. So to try and not do that is so difficult because it's a paradigm shift. It's completely different. But the magnitude of what this Bitcoin is doing and has already done and is doing, you have to learn to revalue everything in Satoshis, your groceries, your automobile, that you have to value that because that is where it's headed. If it's going to be the single most premier asset, which all the so-called experts are telling us it is and will be the most premier asset, and the individuals that hold that asset, everybody else will be beholden to those individuals, including U.S. governments and anybody else.
So $70,000 doesn't seem so expensive right now.
No. And you can buy it, $10 a time. It's freaking nuts, man. This is nuts. This is freaking nuts.
It's knuckin' butt.
That is why you need, and I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to myself here. I need to learn to value my assets and everything else in Satoshi value.